Hey, Jake Williams from Edition InfoSec here. I wanted to chat a little bit about the fact that Apple just released iOS 11.14.1 directly. Now, one of the things that's very, very important here is a new security feature. We talked a little bit about this before when it was in beta mode, but now it's actually released, which makes me super excited. I was also interested to see when it got released what the defaults were going to be, because this is also very, very important. We know that most users traditionally don't change their defaults, right? So anything that is the default tends to be what users are going to stick with indefinitely. And so what's really interesting here is that they've gone in, for those that don't know about this new security feature, this is basically what they call restricted USB device access. Meaning that if your phone has been locked for more than an hour, then a USB device won't be able to connect and drive the phone, right? So whether that's interact with the phone for mass storage or as a keyboard or whatever, and the as a keyboard is specifically the scenario that we're most worried about. This is what GrayKey or GrayShift basically does. The GrayKey is the device, GrayShift is the company, basically to unlock these Apple devices. Now, a lot of law enforcement agencies have invested heavily in this technology. They're not cheap. They're not the most expensive thing in the world either, but they're not cheap. And so I think this is actually a really interesting piece here because, again, as we see a lot of law enforcement investments, and I'll come back to this in a minute, again, that's going to basically accelerate the number or basically expand the number of very interested parties here. Not to say that law enforcement, would not have been interested in any changes in Apple's security posture, iOS security posture in general, but certainly as they've invested in a product to deal with these locks and bypass these screen locks, certainly that. Any capability or any change that removes that capability certainly is going to be of concern to those law enforcement agencies, and doubly so, not just because they can't access the data, but now they've made an investment from their limited budgets to basically now acquire a capability that appears to be dead on arrival here, right? So as I look at this, there's a couple of things that I want to note here. One, the default is to enable this feature, meaning the toggle is off. But the way that the feature reads is basically unlock iPhone to allow USB accessories to connect when it's been more than an hour since your iPhone was locked. Again, the default is for this toggle to be off, meaning that the security has been chosen over any potential usability issues. And honestly, I would not have predicted this. I certainly made the call earlier for Apple to make this the default. Although I would have expected, honestly, at least for upgrades, that they were going to leave this in the on position and allow users the option to turn it off. Again, I applaud Apple, by the way, for what they've done here. I have to now predict that this is going to impact significantly the way that GrayKey and basically the way that GrayKey and other similar devices operate. Given that, I do expect an upcoming fight between law enforcement and Apple, very specifically the FBI. I think the FBI and the Department of Justice are going to run this, but I do expect, or basically, take the helm on any suit requiring Apple to basically comply with unlocking these phones. As has been noted several times before, they have the ability to do it. It's just a question of whether or not Apple has the ability to do it. It's a question of whether or not doing so will impact the security of the devices overall. And I think we're pretty clear that is going to be the case. So what we have here is Apple selecting what is a really sane, honestly, really sane default. But again, I do think it's going to set up some fights with the FBI as well as other law enforcement agencies around the country, possibly even around the world. The other thing that I'm going to throw out there too is that again, if you really want to protect your data, there's another option inside of iOS. Basically, that allows you to go in and this one's off by default, but it's erase all data on the phone after 10 failed passcode attempts. This is another one that's a pretty big deal. And if you don't think it's a big deal, just go back to the FBI's own documentation they submitted under oath. Penalties, FBI, Department of Justice, under penalty of perjury, back to a federal judge, which notes that this is a concern of theirs, right? They are absolutely concerned about this. And if they're concerned about this and you're concerned with your privacy, you should absolutely be enabling this feature, right? GrayKey or no GrayKey, if you can erase all data on the iPhone after 10 failed passcode attempts, game on, that's a good option, right? So again, as I kind of step back and look at this, I think that Apple is gearing up for a fight with law enforcement. What I'm going to say here is probably going to be a little controversial, and I'm sure I'll have some folks throw stuff at me. But hey, rock on. I'm a big boy. I'll take it. I guess when it comes down to it, I'm going to say if you are really concerned about your privacy, if you have a large mainstream device, largely deployed mainstream device, like an iPhone, if you don't see law enforcement talking about the challenges of decrypting it, you should be concerned about the security of that device. One of the things that I see there, because they're running across cases with this, right? There's no question they want the data. If they're not asking about the data, if they're not asking about how to decrypt those devices, I have to step back and ask, do they already have a capability against them, right? One of my favorite examples about this is BitLocker, right? BitLocker is something that I don't see the FBI jumping up and down about. Now, I'm not saying that I don't trust BitLocker as full disk encryption. I absolutely do for enterprise use, right? But I have to note that I've never seen a case where Microsoft has been involved in now, granted, I do understand that not everybody, on the home user side, who may be targets of investigations, uses BitLocker. But I'm going to note that I've never seen the FBI or the Department of Justice go back and complain about the fact that they don't have access to BitLocker encrypted devices, which I can't fathom that they're not seeing these devices in use. So again, I kind of look at that as a corollary and say, man, I'm not seeing them complain about this at all. Should I be concerned, right? So again, take that for whatever it's worth. Again, as you're evaluating security, know that they are jumping up and down about iOS, and I understand we are talking orders of magnitude difference in the number of iPhones seized versus the numbers of, basically BitLocker encrypted criminal PCs that, the FBI and the Department of Justice are dealing with. Look, bottom line with any encryption, obviously, make sane choices, make choices that matter to you. Sorry. Make choices that are sane for your use cases, and also work with your existing workflows. But I think the erase data is good. Basically, erase on 10 failed passcode attempts. Look, if you're backing your stuff up the way you should be, as any sane user would, you can go back and get this data back anyway. And then also, again, coming back on the USB accessory side, I said before, I can't fathom a reason why this wouldn't be disabled in general. I'm not entirely sure why there's a 1 hour timeout. That seems a little bit concerning to me. But again, if you combine the two together anyway, then it's no big deal, right? So again, if you've got the USB accessories plus the basically the USB accessories disable where it's a 1 hour limit plus the erased data, at the end of the day, even if they get it within the hour, if your passcode isn't something that they can jump on and in a matter of minutes, then again, it's not gonna matter if it's not in the first 10 chances. And look, I hope you can all engineer a passcode that's better than the first 10 guesses anyway. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how law enforcement tactics change as a result of this, right? If you're if you're in a defense position, I'd be interested to know, how long is it going to be before somebody argues that that the FBI should have, or whoever it is, right? If they're trying to compel Apple, I would see one of the to release phone data or help them get into a phone. I see an argument coming up here about what did you do in the first hour, right? How did you adjust your workflows to deal with what you now know is likely to be the default with this 1 hour timeout, right? And so I think that there's going to be a question there of what does it look like inside of this. And I'm going to borrow a term here from emergency medicine. Back when I was a paramedic, we use the term very frequently called the golden hour, right? You had that golden hour between the time of an injury to get a trauma patient, basically under a doctor's care in the emergency room. And so there's a lot of stuff that plays into that golden hour. I kind of wonder if law enforcement then is going to adopt a similar model of, again, we've got a suspect, we've got the phone. Let's say, in the best case, right, that they actually saw them using the phone prior to them, approaching the suspect or doing a foot chase or whatever. Bottom line, they grab the suspect, phone's locked. What do you do now, right? It's an iPhone. What do you do now, right? Now, traditionally, this is going to be a bag and tag kind of thing, and try and get it to the forensics lab, but there's no rush to get it to the forensics lab, and there's no rush to begin trying to brute force that passcode. If more people, by the way, had that erase data piece turned on, we wouldn't see people trying to brute force these passcodes. I guess that's another great point there. But anyway, again, coming down the pike here, I see a lot more challenges between law enforcement as well as between law enforcement and Apple. Even if you don't own an iPhone, certainly take a look at enable encryption. That's just, at this point, that's just That's just best practices. Another thing to consider is, right, if this is part of your threat model, and look, from an enterprise perspective, you may not think that your users are going to fall into law enforcement or into trouble potentially with law enforcement. But don't forget, if you've got employees that are traveling internationally, and this is whether they're traveling internationally for work or not, even if it's for leisure, understand, of course, that they take those devices with them. Those devices are subject to inspection as they cross the borders, both in and out of the U.S., right? And so, I say in and out of the U.S., into whatever country they're going to. Most or very many countries outside of the U.S. Not only have immigration, but also immigration checks. And as you're moving through those, again, and coming back into the U.S. With Customs and Border Protection, you are subject to search. Your devices are subject to search. And so I think that there's a lot there to look at, a lot there to consider, even from an enterprise standpoint, because while you may trust our law enforcement, you may not necessarily trust the law enforcement, of whatever countries your users are traveling to. So this does have an enterprise tie-in, whether you, whether you think your employees are going to be subject to a law enforcement investigation or not. Bear in mind, as they're crossing those borders, that they kind of already are, right? Just because, or just by the very nature of them crossing those border checkpoints. So I guess I'm going to close it off here. I think this is probably a good spot to stop. I expect, again, to see more infighting here between Apple, and I expect a new showdown, basically a new case like we saw with Farouk, the mass shooter out in San Bernardino, California. He had 2 iPhones. One they accessed very quickly, the other they did not. This became a big deal. In fact, dormant cyber pathogens came out of this whole event, where one of the district attorneys said that was a fear of theirs, was that Farouk's iPhone may contain dormant cyber pathogens that could be unleashed into the world if only. Nobody quite understood how that worked, including the DA who claimed that. But look, seriously, I expect another landmark case someplace here. The FBI is going to pick a case. I suspect that in other law enforcement agencies, if they pursue separately, are going to pick cases that basically pull on public heartstrings as well as fears, much like the Farouk case did, right? So there was a question of, is this a lone gunman, or are there more attacks planned that we just don't know about? And if the only way we could find him was to get into the iPhone, then. Right. So again, I expect to find some other case like this that's going to, basically going to become an issue there. We'll see how that all plays out. But anyway, look, make sane encryption choices, make sane security choices. Again, my best recommendations right now are, one, upgrade your iOS. If you are an iPhone user, and leave this in its default position. And then I would also, again, I would toggle that erase data after 10 failed attempts. I would go ahead and toggle that on. Again, if you think that the FBI and law enforcement is concerned about that, I have evidence to the contrary, and they said under oath, to the contrary, they are absolutely concerned about that, right? So again, if you are, if you are looking from a security standpoint and trying to do threat modeling, understanding what your adversaries, and again, I don't mean to paint law enforcement as an adversary. I'm just saying here, whether it's law enforcement or criminal, right? Adversary, because bear in mind too, anybody could develop a GrayKey, right? Criminal organizations undoubtedly already have access to GrayKey technology. I just can't fathom otherwise, right? So again, don't think I'm just hammering on law enforcement here. There's a lot of different scenarios to play out here. But look, when it comes down to the security of your data is the security of your data, no matter who we're talking about, right? So bottom line, enable those features, specifically the erase data, leave the USB accessories. That whole idea of the USB accessories ever being a toggle switch is just insane to me. I can't fathom the use case for that. But hey, again, definitely set sane encryption policies, and that goes for laptops too. Anyway, Jake Williams from Edition InfoSec, signing off.